All right, we're going to get started. Ted Donoghue is the superintendent from Litchfield, and he's going to give a little bit more deeper case study on some of the challenges and some of the solutions that they've found at Litchfield to overcome those and kind of tie it into the panelist discussion.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming today and being a captive audience, so I won't keep you captured for that much longer. But in Litchfield, we're a small rural residential community which services about 3,100 people. I'm a working superintendent. I'm a part of a team of 4, so we're responsible for the collection system as well as all the O&M for the collection system and the treatment plant. So what I wanted to do, and just for the record, this photo is from Golden Gate Park this past summer. Larry, who and I share same musical interests, so he wanted a photo from the Spear, but he got one from Golden Gate Park. But what I wanted to talk about was just some low-cost options that we've done in Litchfield to try to mitigate, the flashiness of the bell curve. I mean, I'm sure many operators on their SCADAs, when they have a high flow event, it's like the classic bell curve. And, and depending on how much rain you get, what time of the year, it can create a lot of problems at the plant. So, there's no single, definition for I&I, but again, the EPA does have guidelines. I won't go through this by line, but again, there's for most of the engineers in the room, there's an acceptable amount of I&I that can go into a treatment plant that's not worth pursuing. But when you have the outliers, and when I mean outliers, these might be 5 or 6 high flow events a year for a plant that really push you beyond your seasonal design capacity, because a lot of us have the normal plant capacity, but then we have a peak seasonal, and for us it's like 1.1 million gallons a day. But again, initially that surge of water that comes into the plant from a high water event, that can push all your solids out of your aeration basins into your secondaries, and that's where you can potentially have non-compliance events if the sludge blanket gets too high. But again, for all of us, if I just wanted to do a quick raise of hands, in your operation budgets, how many of you, just raise your hands, actually set aside money for sewer collection system rehab work on a yearly basis? All right, so, and we're beginning to get there. I mean, for me, my commission's very supportive that I can spend money out of the operation budget, but, what we want to do is, make a commitment on a yearly basis to start working at chipping away at the stone. So again, with the I&I issues, it's age and design. There's cost effectiveness. How much can you afford? What's the environmental impact? What's the capacity? We talked about that with the panel discussion. Obviously, Carlos spoke about this with the NIPD permits. And if you reach 90% of design capacity for 180 consecutive days, that's going to trigger an engineering evaluation of what's potentially going on at the plant. For Litchfield, we don't have a combined sanitary sewer system, but we know we have an inflow component to what happens. And a lot of times it's like the Holy Grail. It's like trying to find those areas where that inflow is coming in during a storm. And then, as Carlos mentioned, you can have moratoriums on future connections, which can be a public relation nightmare if a developer can't connect to your system because you are under a moratorium. And then, of course, if you have non-compliance events, it's a public relation issue. So the residents, with the Q alert system, if you have a sewer bypass or sanitary overflow, it's public knowledge, but you don't want those happening like every time it rains. So, we talked about this at the panel discussion. There's flow monitoring, smoke testing, visual inspection, rehabilitation performance. And, I think that's a key element to what we've done in Litchfield is that, the classic bell curve, we've kind of pushed it down so that our peak flow events are not like what they were 3 years ago. And then there's the, potential costs of doing certain things like replacing an old manhole cover that might have holes in it that can cost, or the frame, because as the gentleman from Savvy and Son said, the majority of surface water, and I'll show it in my presentation, comes in between the top of the cone and the manhole frame. In a lot of older collection systems, you have brickwork. And as one of my former chairman, WPCA chairman said, is that water is stupid and it's going to find the path least to resistance. So you drive down any road in Connecticut and you see a sanitary sewer manhole and you'll see cracks around the frame because of how water gets in there. It'll freeze in the winter, it'll thaw out, it starts to get into the manhole. But these are just generally speaking, costs of doing things. Obviously lining manholes, that's a bigger project. I'm not really going to get into that. So this is one of the things that we did. I don't know how many of you have seen these. And, we have these inserts that we get from this company in San Antonio, Texas. It's called No Flow Inflow. And basically it's a PPE insert that has a foam gasket. And you can just size, the manhole, order what you need. You can order 100, you can order 50. They generally cost about $55 a piece. But again, this is what it looks like. These don't have any vent holes in them, but if you have a lot of hydrogen sulfide, you can get a vent hole in it. For us, everything comes to the plant by gravity, so we don't put vent holes in them. And that's what the bottom looks like. There's a gasket along the bottom, so it makes a tight seal from the weight of the cover. And this is a typical example of a manhole in our collection system that's just off the road, but it's at grade. So when it rains, if there wasn't an insert in there, you can just see from the pick holes, groundwater, surface water is going to get in. So when I opened it for this photograph, that was the water that was sitting in it. And that's water that's not going to go into the collection system. So for us, I recently just bought 125, and we put in about 100 so far. And we have 630 manholes in our collection system, and I know for a lot of you in this room, you probably have 3, 4, 5 times that as far as manholes. So, but again, this is a low-cost option that has really worked for us. And they take only minutes to install. They'll last for years. They meet the ASTM specifications for structural integrity, and they're located in San Antonio, Texas. The woman, Joan Doan, she's great to work with. They have a special little form you fill out to make sure you get the exact size that you need. If you sort of have odd bird manholes, a lot of manholes that are smaller, you can get those custom made because they make them in Texas. All right, and so this is the other thing that I want to make a plug for Don LeBlanc over there from DL Views. If you're wondering what that black ring is leaning up against his booth, it's what we call a pro ring. And Don turned us on to these. One of my guys read it in one of the trade magazines. And these are a high strength composite, manhole frame extender that can be utilized with cast iron or with a composite watertight manhole frame, which I'll show you. And it's basically like working with Legos. There's a proprietary adhesive that you use. And you can see in this photo that I'll show you next, like you can bring it up to grade, you can put it above grade. And so for us in Litchfield, we have our main interceptor goes through a swamp basically. And it's populated by a very successful bunch of beavers. And with the, on high water years, they've inundated these manholes and they've flooded over. So what we had to do was use the pro rings. We've raised the manholes 3 feet from grade and then put the watertight manhole frame and cover on it, and we've seen a significant positive result from that. You can also get these little plugs where you can put them into manhole holes that are in covers. You just tap them in. You can use a little pipe wrench to pull them out. And, like obviously one 10-gallon per minute leak can be 14,440 gallons per day. And, on an annual basis, that can cost up to $10,000, depending on what your cost per gallon to treat wastewater is. And then this is an example of they're called Just Cap That. And again, these do cost a little bit more than a traditional cast iron manhole frame, but again, they're watertight. So if you have areas where you collect a lot of surface water, or manholes can be overrun by surface water, these are a smart investment. And we've been very happy. We bought 4 more this past spring that we have to install. And the company's called Just Cap That. So here's an example of one we just did a week and a half ago, where there's a drainage brook on this homeowner's property, and we know it gets overrun with water from the brook. And actually the landscaper told us he sees it all the time. So we ended up talking to the homeowner, and we said, we want to use this new type of manhole cover. And they were like, okay, no problem. And so it took the guys probably like 30 minutes to install. But the next time we have a high flow event and that brook overflows and surrounds that manhole, the water's not going to get into the collection system. And that was one thing that we discovered. And this is the brook right here. So it's dry right now, but again, when you get 3 or 4 inches of rain, that area will be all saturated from the runoff, because there's a swamp on the other side of the road. And they weigh about 80 pounds. They're rated H25 for traffic, but they're not approved by the Connecticut Deep yet. So Don and his team are working on that. But for us, the main motivation was in wetlands. That's where we installed these. And there's a YouTube video, which I'm running short on time, but this presentation will be available. So there's a great little video there that talks about it, which I won't show. And then the next thing I want to talk about is we worked with Green Mountain. Everyone remembers Ray Barr. He's retired now. But we did some work over the last few years with Green Mountain, and they used this proprietary mortar. It's called QSR. It's from a company out in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And this quick setting mortar is specifically designed for that space between the top of the cone and the frame. And usually if you have older manholes, there's going to be brickwork there. So when surface water gets into that area, it erodes the mortar, it starts to break up, the bricks get loose, sometimes they fall into the manhole. And so what we did in Litchfield, we bought a pallet of this. It comes in a 5-gallon bucket. You can get it in bags. And, you can do 1 to 2 manholes if they're in really bad shape, and then you can get 4 to 8 if it's in fair to moderate shape. And so here's an example. You can see on the inside, it's not the best photo, but this is before, and then this is after. So me and my guys did this. You just need, a mason brush, water, a mortar pan, and then, you can do, we've done over the last couple of months, we've done 55 manholes like this. But, for a small team, that's a lot of work, and if you don't have a separate collection system team, you have to integrate it into your workload. But again, we just made this sort of a new thing that we do, and then when we have windows of opportunity, we might focus 2 or 3 days where it only needs 2 guys to be there, unless it's on a high traffic road, then we would need some traffic control. But again, that should last a long time. One thing, I was at another conference yesterday, and the engineers who do, and I'm sure the gentleman from Savvy can talk about this, but the pH of a brick or the inside of a manhole frame, when you do some sort of treatment, it has to be 9 or higher for the product to stick to it. So when I get back, I'm going to get a little pH testing kit, like at ACE, and I just want to test the pH on brick and concrete before we do this treatment, just to see what the pH is, because if it's lower than 9, the treatment won't last as long. So that was just something I learned in another presentation yesterday. And then this is just a leaky joint can generate 7,200 gallons of water per day. And then the other thing I want to talk about is digitizing your collection system. For a small system like us, we don't have the same system that like the city of Waterbury would have, but we did find out, and John can speak to this because they actually turned it on to us, is this system called Diamond Maps. And we pay $20 a month for the cloud servicing, and we can basically digitize our collection system. We can input like what type of preventive maintenance work we've done. We can put in manhole inspection data. We can include photographs. And so we've done that as well. And they have a great video on their site, which is part of this presentation, but I won't show it right now since we're a little behind time here. And then again, we talked about sump pumps, foundation drains, sewer lateral lining or replacement. Like in a community like in Litchfield, which has many older properties, some of the building connectors are like 200 or 300 feet before they get to our sewer line. So we have this sort of live and let live where we want to work with homeowners to try to do any sort of work that will help keep water out. So if like someone has a blockage and we say, oh, we have a camera, we can TV your lateral for you for free because you're a customer of ours. And they're like, great, Dad, that's wonderful, but I have an ulterior motive that I want to see what condition the building lateral's in. And if I find problems, then I have a video that I can say to the homeowner, you have a big problem here. We'd appreciate it if you can fix it. And generally they will fix it. We don't always have to result to, penalizing a customer with a fine. But if they have a really bad problem and they don't want to fix it, well, typically in your WPCA regulations, you can levy a fine if someone doesn't repair it. But this next video, which I will show, so this is just the regular sewer die, and that's a paving ring. But you can just see, just because of that gap, and this is just from a rainy day a couple weeks ago, how the surface water is getting into the collection system. So what my guys did, they went through a swamp where our main interceptor is, and so this is the swamp I'm telling you about where the beavers live. This is part of White Memorial Foundation. It's a popular hiking area. But we have like 10 manholes through this wetland area. So they went through there when it was pouring rain. They put the dye packs out. They came back in 20 minutes, and all the dye was going into the sewer line. So then we knew, okay, this is a problem for us. So that's where we started using the Pro Rings and the watertight manholes. And this shows you, like, you can't see, but see that little marker right there? That's one of my interceptor manholes. So, and you can see the water line, how high it gets. But we have an agreement with White Woods that if we need to destroy the beaver dam, we can go there with a backhoe and do it. But they'll just rebuild. So there are ways, if you have issues with beavers, there's different types of products out there that could trick the beavers so the water level won't get as high or encroach on your sewer line. Because we actually, in this section, a couple years ago when we had the really high wet weather event year, we got like 94 inches of rain, we couldn't, we needed a canoe to inspect manholes because the water from the beavers inundated over the easement. The other best practices I'll just share is maintaining right-of-ways. That's a big thing in wooded areas because if you do have a problem, and we use the expression, we lost a manhole, and my chairman would be like, how did you lose a manhole, Ted? It's like, well, we haven't been there in 2 years, and guess what? Mother Nature has taken over. So we want to make sure that we maintain our right-of-ways so that we can inspect manholes. And then we also want to clearly mark them. And so that's what we did with all those green reflective things. Conducting visual and ongoing manhole inspections, especially during wet, prolonged periods. Work with your budget to implement operation funding each fiscal year to ensure work and supplies are being bought and used. And then, of course, even if you don't have an engineering consulting firm working for you, you want to develop a multi-year approach to this. You're not going to solve it in 2 years or 5 years. It's going to probably be the rest of your career with that municipality that you'll be dealing with this. So that's it. And if anyone has any questions. All right, thank you.